Centuries before satellites circled our planet, sailors crossed vast oceans using only natural signs. They ventured into complete emptiness with no guarantee of return, guided by stars, winds, and waves. This is the story of how they did it. You will discover the forgotten genius of ancient navigation, a system so sophisticated it could pinpoint tiny islands in a featureless Pacific. How did a simple piece of wood and a knotted string reveal a ship's latitude? What secret did Viking navigators see in an ordinary crystal? We are about to uncover the answers. What does it truly mean to find your way in a world without maps? That emptiness was not empty to the Polynesian wayfinders. While European ships still hugged coastlines, these master navigators were reading the open ocean like a map. They called their art wayfinding, a skill that wove together every thread of the natural world. It was not just about a destination, but about understanding your place within a living, breathing seascape. They learned to see what others missed. A certain type of cloud gathering on the horizon, for instance, could hint at an island hidden far beyond the curve of the earth. These stationary clouds often form over land, catching on the peaks of volcanoes, creating a permanent signature in the sky for those who knew how to look. They watched the birds. The flight patterns of terns and noddies at dusk were a crucial clue. Seeing birds flying out to sea in the morning and returning at night meant you were within a day or two of their nesting grounds, their reliable daily commute pointing the way to land. Even the ocean itself had a rhythm they could feel. Great swells, generated by distant weather systems, would bend and refract around islands. A seasoned wayfinder, sitting in his canoe, could sense these subtle shifts in the wave patterns through the motion of his vessel, a constant rolling whisper of information. At night, their world was lit by a celestial roadmap. They did not just know the stars, they knew the star paths. Each island lay beneath a specific celestial address, a point where certain stars would pass directly overhead. To sail to Tahiti, you followed the path of the star Sirius. To reach Hawaii, you kept the Pleiades at your back. They memorized these routes through chants and stories, a sacred oral tradition passed from navigator to apprentice across generations. With no written records, this knowledge was a living library carried in memory. It was this profound connection to their environment that allowed them to achieve the impossible, settling islands scattered across 10 million square miles of Pacific Ocean, a feat of exploration that remains one of humanity's greatest journeys. That same sky that guided the Polynesians became the universal clock and compass for sailors across the globe, a celestial GPS long before the first satellite ever flew. For centuries, the sun, moon, planets, and stars were the only fixed points in a sailor's shifting world. The fundamental principle was both simple and brilliant. By measuring the angle between a celestial body and the horizon, a navigator could unlock his position on the vast ocean. This angle, known as the altitude, was the key to finding latitude, your north-south location on the planet. If you measured the height of the North Star above the horizon, that number in degrees was almost exactly your latitude. At the equator, it would skim the horizon. As you sailed north, it would climb higher and higher in the sky, a perfect celestial yardstick. Different cultures engineered elegant tools to take this vital measurement. Arab sailors in the Indian Ocean used a simple yet effective device called the kamal. It was just a small wooden rectangle tied to a string with a series of knots. The sailor would hold the knot in his teeth, extend the board until it just filled the space between the horizon and the pole star, and the knot his lips touched would tell him his latitude. In Europe, navigators developed more complex instruments like the cross staff and the quadrant. The cross staff looked like a carpenter's tool, a main staff with a sliding crosspiece. The navigator would line up one end with the horizon and slide the crosspiece until the other end touched the star, reading the angle from markings on the staff. Every clear night was a chance to check your course, to confirm you were not being pushed silently off track by unknown currents. But this was not a simple matter of looking up. It required deep, memorized knowledge of the heavens, knowing which stars would be where on any given night of the year, and the skill to make a precise observation on the deck of a rocking ship. A single mistake in reading that angle could mean the difference between a triumphant arrival in a new world and being forever lost at sea. But this celestial yardstick had one critical flaw. It only worked in half the world. For those navigating the vast southern oceans, the North Star was invisible, vanished below the horizon. Here, sailors faced a sky without a single fixed pole star to guide them. The heavens seemed to spin in a great, chaotic wheel. Yet, necessity is the mother of invention, and southern navigators devised an equally brilliant solution. They learned to navigate by a constellation, a pattern of stars that acted as a celestial clock. The key was the Southern Cross, a small but distinct cruciform of stars that pointed the way. By visualizing a line extending 5 times the length of the cross itself, they could locate the South Celestial Pole, the true anchor of the southern sky. This was not a perfect singular point like Polaris, but a region of empty, dark sky. To pinpoint it, they used 2 bright pointer stars from the nearby constellation Centaurus, drawing imaginary lines in the starry expanse to triangulate their southern bearing. Other cultures developed their own complex star lore. Polynesian wayfinders, for instance, used the rising and setting of specific stars to create a mental compass rose, dividing the horizon into 32 sections, each with its own guiding beacon. This knowledge was not written in books but memorized in chants and stories, a living map of the night sky. The challenge of southern navigation demanded a deeper, more integrated understanding of the celestial dance. It was a testament to human ingenuity, proving that even without a single constant guide, we could still learn to read the language of the stars and find our way across the deepest, darkest waters. While the stars were a brilliant guide at night, the sun ruled the day with its own predictable rhythm. Ancient sailors watched its journey from dawn to dusk, transforming its arc into a reliable compass and clock. The most basic method was also the most profound. By simply noting where the sun rose and set, a navigator could establish an unwavering east-west line. Every morning, the sun broke the horizon roughly in the east, and every evening it dipped below it in the west. This daily cycle provided a fixed frame of reference, a cardinal direction that anchored all other calculations. But the sun offered more than just a general bearing. At its highest point, the midday sun, sailors could determine their exact north-south orientation. In the northern hemisphere, the sun would always be due south at noon, its shadow casting a perfect north-pointing line. This solar noon became a critical moment of the day, a reset for the ship's sense of direction. With the right tools, this midday observation became even more powerful. By measuring the sun's maximum height above the horizon, a navigator could calculate his latitude, just as he might with the North Star at night. This required an understanding of how the sun's path shifted with the seasons, climbing higher in the sky in summer and lower in winter. Cultures that mastered these patterns held the keys to the open ocean. The Vikings, for instance, used a sun compass, a wooden disc with a central gnomon that cast a shadow. By marking the shadow's tip throughout the day, they could trace the sun's arc and derive their cardinal direction even under overcast skies, using the last known shadow point. The Phoenicians, legendary Mediterranean traders, possessed such a deep, empirical knowledge of the sun's seasonal movements that they could venture far from land with confidence. Yet solar navigation was fraught with challenges. A single cloudy day could obscure the sun completely, leaving a ship directionless. Stormy conditions made precise measurements with delicate instruments nearly impossible on a heaving deck. And the sun's changing declination meant that a navigator's calculations had to be adjusted daily, requiring either complex tables or a lifetime of memorized experience. To rely on the sun was to engage in a constant, delicate dance with a moving target, a dance that separated the coastal trader from the true ocean master. Yet the sun and stars shared a profound weakness. They vanished behind clouds or sank below the horizon, leaving a ship blind in a featureless gray world. What sailors needed was a guide that worked in any weather, day or night. That guide arrived in the form of a simple, spinning needle. The magnetic compass, a Chinese invention that traveled west along the Silk Road, sparked a revolution in European navigation around the 12th century. For the first time, a captain could know his direction with certainty, even when the sky was a solid sheet of gray. The earliest designs were beautifully simple. A magnetized sliver of iron was attached to a straw or a piece of wood and floated in a bowl of water. Freed from friction, the needle would spin unhindered until it settled, its point steadfastly aimed toward the north. This was nothing short of magic. Suddenly, a ship could maintain its course through a week of overcast skies or a moonless night. It provided a constant, humming directional truth that made the ocean feel just a little bit smaller. But this new tool was not perfect. As ships grew larger and voyages longer, the basic water bowl became impractical on a storm-tossed deck. The solution was the dry compass, where the needle was mounted on a pivot under a glass cover. Then came a truly brilliant innovation, the gimbal. This was a set of rings mounted within each other, allowing the compass to swing freely and remain level no matter how violently the ship pitched and rolled. Now the navigator could always get a steady reading. The compass, however, had its own secrets and deceptions. Navigators soon discovered that the magnetic North Pole was not the same as the true geographic North Pole. This difference, called variation, changed depending on where you were in the world. A compass needle in London might point 10 degrees east of true north, while one in New York pointed west of it. The most skilled navigators carried charts with these variations, constantly adjusting their bearings to stay on a true course. An even more insidious problem was deviation, caused by the ship itself. Iron nails, anchors, and even cannons could pull the sensitive needle off its true heading, creating a unique and dangerous magnetic field around the compass. Captains had to learn the magnetic personality of their own vessel, compensating for its invisible pull. Over centuries, the compass evolved from a curious novelty into the heart of the ship, housed in a dedicated binnacle, often shielded and corrected with its own magnets. It was this relentless refinement of a simple idea that ultimately enabled the great age of exploration, guiding ships across oceans with a quiet, unwavering confidence that the sky alone could never provide. The compass gave you direction, but it could not tell you where you were. For that, the medieval mariner reached for a device of breathtaking complexity, an instrument that was, in its time, a handheld supercomputer. This was the astrolabe, a beautiful brass disc covered in intricate engravings that mapped the very heavens. It was a physical model of the universe, a series of rotating discs and pointers that represented the celestial sphere as seen from a specific latitude. At its heart was a web of star positions and coordinate lines, a fixed map of the night sky that could be adjusted for the time of day and the date. The user would hold the astrolabe by a ring at its top, letting it hang vertically. A movable sighting rule, called an alidade, was spun around the central pivot. You would line up the two sights on the alidade with a specific star or the sun, and then rate the star's altitude in degrees from the finely engraved scale on the rim. This single measurement was the key. With the altitude of a known celestial body and the precise time of the observation, a navigator could consult astronomical tables to perform a calculation that revealed his latitude. It was a process of solving a spherical triangle on the fly, translating a measurement of the sky into a coordinate on the Earth. But using this delicate, finely calibrated instrument on the deck of a ship was a nightmare. A slight wobble in the hanging disc could throw off the reading by miles. The wind would catch the large surface area, and the constant pitching of the vessel made holding a steady sight nearly impossible. The solution was the mariner's astrolabe. This seagoing version stripped away the beautiful complexity. It was a heavy, solid bronze ring, often with cut-away sections to let the wind pass through. The alidade was rugged, and the entire instrument was weighted to hang more steadily. It was a tool built for brute force accuracy in the most unforgiving environment. Surviving examples recovered from shipwrecks, like one from a Spanish Armada vessel lost in 1588, show these instruments were not just for show. They are worn from use, their scales etched by countless observations, silent witnesses to the moment when navigation transformed from an art into a measurable science, guiding explorers confidently into the unknown. Even with the astrolabe, measuring the sun's height was a painful task. Staring directly into its blinding glare to line up a sight could damage a navigator's eyesight permanently. This daily hazard sparked the invention of a truly clever instrument, the backstaff. It was designed with one brilliant principle in mind. You could measure the sun by turning your back to it. Imagine a navigator on the deck of a ship, no longer squinting into the harsh light. Instead, he would face the horizon. The backstaff consisted of two overlapping arcs. The navigator would look through a sight on one end, focusing on the horizon line. A shadow vane on the upper arc would cast a shadow from the sun, and the navigator would slide a second, movable vane along the lower arc until the shadow's edge precisely touched the horizon in his view. The angle between the two vanes gave him the sun's altitude, all without his eyes ever meeting the sun's direct rays. It was an elegant solution to a dangerous problem, a tool that protected its user while delivering the vital data he needed. Before the backstaff, the most common tool was the crossstaff. Its design was beautifully straightforward, a long main staff with a sliding crosspiece. The navigator would place one end of the staff against his cheekbone just below his eye. He would then slide the wooden crosspiece back and forth until its top edge seemed to touch the star he was sighting, and its bottom edge lined up perfectly with the horizon. He would then read the angle from markings on the staff. This simple act of alignment, repeated night after night, gave sailors a number that held the key to their north-south position. But how did that number become a location on a map? That single measurement, whether from a cross staff or a backstaff, was just the beginning. Once the navigator had the sun's or a star's altitude, he would consult a set of navigation tables. These thick books were the software of their day, filled with complex calculations that predicted the positions of celestial bodies for every day of the year. He would cross-reference his measured angle with the known declination of the sun for that specific date. After a few minutes of calculation, he would arrive at his latitude. It was this very process that guided explorers like John Davis, the man who invented the backstaff, through the treacherous Arctic passages. His instrument became a standard tool for generations of sailors, allowing them to push further into unknown seas with greater confidence and safer eyes. The data from these wooden tools literally put new lands on the map, transforming a shimmering celestial height into a fixed line on a chart, a line that led directly to a new world. Before the astrolabe and backstaff, there was an instrument that laid the foundation for them all, the mariner's quadrant. Its design was a model of elegant simplicity, a flat quarter circle of wood or brass, marked with a scale from 0 to 90 degrees. Along one straight edge were 2 sighting pins, and from the center of the curved edge hung a weighted string, the plumb bob. To measure the height of the North Star, a sailor would hold the quadrant vertically, looking through the 2 pins to align the top pin with the star itself. As the ship rocked, the plumb line would swing freely across the graduated scale. The point where the string settled indicated the star's altitude in degrees, a direct reading of the ship's latitude. This simple act of alignment and observation was one of the most crucial tasks on any long voyage. But that swinging plumb line revealed the quadrant's greatest weakness, the motion of the sea itself. On a calm day, the reading might be steady, but in any kind of swell, the plumb line would dance erratically across the scale, making a single, precise measurement nearly impossible. Navigators developed a clever technique to overcome this. They would not trust one sighting. Instead, they would take a rapid series of measurements, noting the highest and lowest angles the plumb line touched. The true altitude was the average of these extremes. It was a skill born of patience and practice, learning to read the rhythm of the ship's roll to extract a single number of truth from a sea of chaos. This humble instrument was on board the ships of history's most famous explorers. When Christopher Columbus made his legendary voyage across the Atlantic in 1492, his quadrant readings were his primary celestial guide, confirming his progress and helping him maintain a course in the complete unknown. Decades later, Vasco da Gama relied on the same tool to navigate around the Cape of Good Hope and into the Indian Ocean, using the stars of the Southern Hemisphere to map his way to a new trade route. The quadrant was the first dedicated tool that turned the abstract geometry of the heavens into a practical, repeatable measurement on the deck of a ship, proving that even the ocean's vastness could be quantified, one careful observation at a time. Yet for all the brilliance of celestial tools, a ship's position was a story told in 2 languages. The stars gave snapshots of absolute truth, but the daily narrative of the voyage was written in the language of estimation, a process known as dead reckoning. This was mathematics at sea, a continuous calculation of where you should be based on where you had been. It began with a fixed point, perhaps a headland last sighted or a latitude confirmed by a noon sun sight. From that known start, the navigator would plot a course forward, factoring in 3 essential elements: the ship's direction, its speed, and the time spent sailing. Direction came from the compass, a constant companion, but speed was a far more elusive figure to capture. How could you measure velocity on a featureless ocean? The answer was brilliantly simple: a piece of wood and a knotted rope. This was the log and line system. A crewman would heave a weighted wooden log, shaped like a pie wedge, over the ship's stern. The log would remain relatively stationary in the water, acting as a floating mark. As the ship sailed away, a rope tied to the log would pay out over the rail. This rope was specially prepared with knots tied at precise intervals. The sailor would count how many knots slipped through his fingers in the time it took a 30-second sandglass to empty. If 5 knots passed, the ship was moving at 5 knots, a unit of speed we still use today, born from this very practice. With a compass heading and a speed, the navigator could draw a line on his chart, a dead reckoning track that represented his best guess of the journey. But the ocean is never passive. A skilled navigator knew his plot was only a theory. He had to account for the invisible forces constantly pushing the ship off its intended path. Ocean currents could be flowing beneath the hull, a silent river within the sea, adding or subtracting miles from the true distance traveled. The wind itself did not just fill the sails, it pushed the entire vessel sideways, an effect called leeway. A ship sailing close to the wind might be pointed due north, but actually moving northwest, its hull sliding through the water like a skater on ice. The navigator would estimate this leeway, perhaps 5 degrees or 20, and adjust his plotted course accordingly. Yet every one of these estimates, the speed, the current, the leeway, carried a tiny error. Over days and then weeks at sea, these small mistakes compounded. A half-knot error in speed estimation for 10 days meant you were 80 miles from where your chart claimed you should be. This was the great peril of dead reckoning. Its errors accumulated in silence, creating a growing gap between the ship's imagined position and its true location on the vast, empty ocean. That is why the sight of a familiar star breaking through the clouds was always a moment of profound relief. It was a correction, a hard truth that reset the accumulating fiction of the dead reckoning plot, pulling the ship back from the brink of a navigational fantasy and onto the solid ground of celestial reality. But the dead reckoning plot and the celestial sight could only tell you where you were in the open ocean. As a ship drew near to land, a new kind of fear took hold, the terror of an unseen shore. In the fog or on a moonless night, the only thing standing between a vessel and a jagged coastline was a simple length of rope and a lump of lead. This was the lead line, the sailor's final and most tactile guide. The tool itself was humble, a conical lead weight, often weighing 7 pounds for shallow water and up to 14 for deep sea sounding, attached to a long, specially marked rope. The marks were a code of leather and cloth, a language of depth tied into the line itself. At 2 fathoms, you would find a strip of leather with 2 ends. At 5 fathoms, a white cloth. At 10, a piece of leather with a hole in it. These were the only signs a sailor needed to feel in the dark, a braille of the seabed. The procedure was a ritual of approach. A sailor would stand in the chains, a platform extending from the ship's side, and swing the lead in a wide arc, heaving it far ahead of the moving vessel. As the ship glided forward, the line would go taut, standing vertically in the water. He would then haul it in, reading the depth from the mark nearest the surface. But the true genius of the lead line was hidden in its base. The bottom of the weight was hollowed out, a small cup filled with tallow, a sticky animal fat. When the lead hit the bottom, it would bring up a sample, a tiny core of the ocean floor stuck in the grease. An experienced navigator would then read this sample like a book. Crunching coarse, yellow sand between his fingers might mean he was approaching one particular headland. Sticky blue mud could signal the estuary of a specific river. A sample of broken shells and gravel might place him exactly at the entrance to a familiar harbor. Every coastline had its own unique signature written on the seabed, meticulously recorded on coastal charts. In the thick fog blanketing the English Channel, a captain might not see the shore for days, his ears straining for the sound of breakers. But with a steady rhythm of heaving the lead, feeling the line and reading the bottom, he could trace his way along an invisible contour, following a path of distinctive mud until it gave way to the clean sand of the harbor approach, his ship guided safely home by the very ground beneath the waves. While the lead line read the story of the seabed, a new kind of map was emerging that painted the entire coastline in breathtaking detail. These were the portolan charts, the medieval equivalent of a maritime superhighway atlas. Unlike the fanciful, symbolic maps of the inland world, portolan charts were ruthlessly practical, born from the direct experience of sailors who had traced every bay and headland with their own hands. Their most striking feature was a web of lines crisscrossing the parchment, a spider web of possibilities. These were room lines radiating from central compass roses like the spokes of a wheel. Each line represented a path of constant compass bearing. A navigator could simply lay a ruler between two ports, see which room line it paralleled, and know exactly what heading to set on his compass to sail a straight line, at least in theory, from departure to destination. This was a system built for the real world of sailing, not for abstract geography. The charts ignored the empty interior of continents, focusing entirely on the intricate lacework of coasts. They were crammed with useful information, a sailor's directory written in ink and vellum. You would find the names of every safe harbor and river mouth inscribed perpendicular to the shoreline, ready to be read as you sailed past. Tiny symbols marked hidden shoals, dangerous reefs, and even the quality of an anchorage. A small cross might warn of a shipwreck, while a drawing of a tower indicated a lighthouse or a prominent landmark. The accuracy of these charts, especially for the well-traveled Mediterranean, was astounding. The oldest surviving example, the Carta Pisana from the late 13th century, shows a recognizable outline of Europe from the Black Sea to the Atlantic. It was not based on a mathematical grid of longitude and latitude, but on a living network of accumulated compass bearings and estimated distances logged by countless unknown mariners. This collective intelligence, pooled over generations, transformed coastal navigation from a cautious creep into a confident journey. A merchant captain could now plan a voyage from Genoa to Alexandria with a new level of assurance, his course already plotted on the parchment before him, the known world rendered safe and navigable by a masterpiece of practical cartography. Yet even the finest portolan chart had a fatal flaw. Its world was flat. It worked beautifully for the enclosed Mediterranean, but it was useless for crossing an ocean or sailing far from the equator. A straight line drawn on a flat map did not correspond to a straight line of constant compass bearing on the curved surface of the Earth. This fundamental problem, the challenge of projecting a spherical world onto a flat sheet of parchment, baffled cartographers for generations. Then, in 1569, a Flemish mapmaker named Gerardus Mercator unveiled a solution so brilliant it would redefine global navigation. His world map, titled New and More Complete Representation of the Terrestrial Globe Proper for Use in Navigation, was a quiet revolution. Its genius lay in its mathematical distortion. Mercator realized that to keep compass courses, or room lines, perfectly straight on his chart, he had to stretch the entire map. He did this by gradually increasing the distance between the lines of latitude as they moved away from the equator and toward the poles. On his map, a 1-degree line of latitude near the equator might be an inch tall, but that same 1 degree near Greenland would be several inches tall. This stretching preserved the angles. A sailor could now draw a straight line between Lisbon and Havana, measure its compass bearing with a protractor, and that exact bearing would hold true for the entire voyage. His compass and his chart were finally speaking the same language. This made chart plotting and course planning dramatically simpler and more reliable. Navigators could now confidently plot long ocean crossings without complex corrections for the Earth's curvature. But this revolutionary accuracy came at a cost: the distortion of size. Because the higher latitudes were stretched so dramatically, land masses near the poles appeared grotesquely enlarged. On a Mercator map, Greenland looks larger than Africa, when in reality Africa is 14 times larger. Antarctica becomes a massive, unrecognizable white fringe along the bottom of the world. Yet for the sailor, this was a trade-off they were willing to make. They were not concerned with the true comparative size of continents. They were concerned with steering a constant, predictable course without running aground. The Mercator projection became the undisputed standard for nautical charts for over 4 centuries. It was this very map, with its elegantly straightened room lines, that guided the great ships of exploration and trade across every ocean, shrinking the world not by making it smaller, but by making it finally and reliably flat. Yet for all its brilliance, the Mercator map still left one coordinate maddeningly blank. You could know your latitude perfectly, but your east-west position, your longitude, remained a dangerous mystery. The solution to this ancient problem arrived not from a clockmaker's workshop, but from the sky itself, in the form of our closest celestial neighbor. The moon moves with a remarkable speed against the backdrop of fixed stars, completing a full circuit of the sky in roughly 27 days. This means it shifts its position by its own diameter every hour, acting like the minute hand on a giant celestial clock. If a navigator could accurately measure the moon's position relative to a known star, and if he knew what time that same alignment was observed from a fixed reference point, like Greenwich, he could calculate the time difference and thus his longitude. The key measurement was the lunar distance, the precise angular separation between the moon's bright limb and a specific guide star. To capture this, a navigator used a sextant, a more advanced instrument that could measure angles between any two objects with stunning precision, even in the dim light of dusk. He would bring the moon and the star into alignment in the sextant's mirrors, then read the angle from the instrument's finely engraved scale. This single number was the first crucial piece of the puzzle. The second piece came from a book thicker than any Bible, the Nautical Almanac. These almanacs were monumental works of computation, published years in advance. They contained pre-calculated tables that listed the predicted lunar distances for a selection of bright stars for every 3 hours of every day, as seen from the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. The navigator would take his measured lunar distance and search through the almanac's pages to find the Greenwich time when the moon and star were predicted to be exactly that far apart. The difference between that Greenwich time and his local ship time, which he could determine from the sun, gave him his longitude. Every hour of time difference equated to 15 degrees of longitude. It was a process of breathtaking complexity. The mathematics involved spherical trigonometry, a daunting task for even a skilled mathematician on dry land, let alone a sailor on a pitching deck. A single longitude calculation could take a skilled navigator up to 4 hours of continuous, error-free work. He had to account for atmospheric refraction, which bent the light from the stars, the parallax of the moon, which changed its apparent position based on the observer's location on Earth, and the semi-diameter of the moon itself, since he was measuring from its edge. One small miscalculation, One misread number in a dense table, and the result could be wrong by hundreds of miles. Yet for decades, this was the only method that offered a reliable, global solution to the longitude problem. It demanded the mind of an astronomer and the hands of a sailor, a final celestial key that unlocked the last great secret of the open ocean. While the lunar distance method offered a celestial solution, it demanded the skills of a master astronomer. The true breakthrough for the common sailor came from a humble carpenter who dared to build a perfect clock. John Harrison spent 40 years of his life on a single obsession: to construct a timepiece that could survive the open ocean. The core principle was simple in theory but staggering in its practical demands. If you carried the exact time from a fixed starting point, like Greenwich, you could compare it to your local solar time. Every hour of difference between your local noon and Greenwich time meant you were 15 degrees of longitude east or west. The problem was that no clock of the era could withstand the journey. The constant pitching and rolling of a ship would destroy delicate gears. Changes in temperature would expand or contract the metal components, speeding up or slowing down the mechanism. Salt air and humidity would rust the intricate parts into a useless mass. The British government was so desperate for a solution it established the Longitude Act in 1714, offering a prize of £20,000, a fortune, to anyone who could solve it. Harrison, a self-taught craftsman from Yorkshire, took this as his life's calling. His first marine timekeeper, known as H1, was a monstrous creation of brass and wood, weighing over 70 pounds. It looked more like a piece of ship's machinery than a clock, yet it incorporated brilliant innovations to combat the ship's motion, using counter-swinging balances that canceled out the vessel's roll. It performed well on a test voyage to Lisbon, but Harrison, a perfectionist, was not satisfied. He knew he could do better. Over the next 3 decades, he built 2 more large machines, H2 and H3, each one refining his ideas. He invented the grasshopper escapement, a clever mechanism that minimized friction, allowing the clock to tick for years without needing lubrication. He developed the bimetallic strip, fusing 2 different metals together that expanded at different rates with heat, automatically compensating for temperature changes and keeping the clock's beat perfectly steady. These were the quiet, mechanical miracles that made precision possible. His masterpiece, H4, looked nothing like its predecessors. It was a large silver pocket watch, 5 inches in diameter. After a lifetime of building enormous machines, Harrison had miniaturized his genius. In 1761, his son William took H4 on a grueling test voyage to Jamaica. After 5 months at sea, the watch had lost just 5 seconds, an error in longitude of less than 2 nautical miles. The Board of Longitude, skeptical of this uneducated man's achievement, withheld the full prize, demanding more tests. It was the legendary explorer Captain James Cook who became the chronometer's greatest advocate. On his second voyage, he took a copy of Harrison's design, known as K1. He used it to map the Pacific with breathtaking accuracy, declaring it his trusted friend and never failing to satisfy the most sanguine expectations. Cook's verification was the final proof. Harrison's time machine had finally tamed the last great unknown, turning the vast, trackless ocean into a measured grid, and placing the power of longitude into the hands of every sailor who followed. Harrison's chronometer was a mechanical marvel, but long before its gears began to turn, sailors were reading a different kind of rhythm, one written not in brass, but in the very pulse of the ocean itself. They navigated by the swells, the great rolling waves generated by distant weather systems that march across the deep like steady, predictable highways. These are not the chaotic, wind-whipped waves on the surface. These are the ocean's deep, powerful heartbeat, a consistent pattern that can be felt for thousands of miles. For the master navigators of the Pacific, this was a tangible map. An experienced wayfinder would sometimes lie down in the bottom of his canoe, closing his eyes to eliminate all other senses. With his body pressed against the hull, he could feel the subtle lift and fall, the specific direction and rhythm of the primary swell. He was not just riding the waves, he was listening to them. His entire vessel became a massive seismograph, recording the secrets of the sea. The most critical clues came from how these swells behaved around land. When a deep ocean swell encounters an island, it does not simply stop. It bends or refracts, wrapping around the landmass. A navigator lying in his canoe hundreds of miles away could feel these disturbances. He might detect a slight calming in the water, a cross swell that should not be there, or a faint echo of the main swell rebounding from a hidden shore. These were the whispers of an island beyond the horizon. It was a skill of profound sensitivity. A navigator from the Marshall Islands, for instance, would memorize the unique swell patterns that led to each atoll, a mental library of oceanic signatures. He knew that a particular combination of swells would lead him to a specific chain of islands, the waves acting as invisible guide rails across the empty sea. Modern oceanography has since confirmed the astonishing accuracy of this ancient science. Satellite observations and wave buoys show that the refraction patterns around islands are real and measurable. The disruption of a deep water swell by a volcanic island creates a distinct shadow zone and areas of wave convergence that can extend for over 100 miles. The traditional navigators were not using mystical senses. They were interpreting complex physical phenomena with a refined, embodied knowledge that science is only now beginning to fully quantify. They understood the ocean as a living, breathing entity, its long, rolling swells serving as a constant, reliable guide through the vastness. A subtle language of movement that spoke volumes to those who had learned its grammar. The ocean's surface told its own stories to those who knew how to read them, but the sky above was also filled with winged messengers. Sailors learned that the world of birds was a living atlas of the sea. Different species had strict territories, their flight ranges acting as natural rangefinders from the shore. The sight of a northern gannet, a powerful white seabird, meant you were likely within 50 miles of land, as these birds rarely ventured further on their fishing trips. But spotting a wandering albatross with its immense, graceful wings signaled something entirely different. These majestic birds could roam thousands of miles from any coastline, their presence not a promise of land, but a confirmation of the open ocean's immense scale. The most reliable guides were the land-nesting seabirds like terns and puffins. Their behavior painted a clear picture, seeing them flying purposefully out to sea in the morning and then returning in the evening revealed a crucial fact. They were commuting to and from their nests. A ship could follow this daily traffic flow directly to an unseen island, using the birds as a living compass pointing toward home. Migratory patterns offered another layer of guidance. In the North Atlantic, Norse navigators watched the seasonal flights of geese and other waterfowl. A steady stream of birds heading northwest in the spring could indicate the direction of land masses like Iceland or even the distant coast of Greenland, their instinctive paths cutting across the waves like dotted lines on a chart. These observations were woven into their sagas, tales of following bird flights to discover new shores. Beyond birds, the smallest signs held immense meaning. A piece of floating driftwood or a specific type of land-based insect caught on the rigging was cause for celebration. These were not random debris, they were flotsam from a nearby river or forest, carried out to sea by currents. Polynesian navigators were masters of this art, reading the presence of certain spiders or leaves as sure signs that an island was nearing, sometimes days before it became visible to the human eye. They understood that the ocean was not an empty void, but a connected ecosystem, where every branch, every feather, and every unusual cloud formation was a page in a vast natural guidebook, written for those patient enough to learn its language. A cloud could speak volumes to a sailor who understood its language. While a random puff of white meant nothing, a stationary cluster gathering in an otherwise empty sky was a landmark written in vapor. These clouds form when the sun heats an island's landmass, causing warm air to rise and condense into a persistent cumulus cap, often anchored directly over the volcano or atoll that created it. A navigator spotting this fixed formation on the horizon knew it was not drifting with the weather, but was tethered to something solid hidden far beyond the curvature of the earth. It was a silent, stationary beacon that could be seen from over 50 miles away. Sometimes, the sky offered an even more vivid clue in a phenomenon known as the loom. This was a faint, greenish or turquoise tint glowing on the underside of a cloud, a delicate reflection cast upward from the shallow, sunlit waters of a coral lagoon or the dense canopy of a forested island. It was not the color of the sea itself, but its light, mirrored on the cloud base, painting a target in pastel hues against the blue sky. Over generations, entire cloud patterns became legendary among Pacific sailing communities. A particular, jagged formation might be known to always hover over one specific chain of atolls, while a softer, rounded bank reliably marked another. These were not vague guesses but specific, trusted signatures recorded in oral tradition. The great Polynesian explorers who settled islands across thousands of miles of ocean relied on this aerial map. Early European explorers, once they learned to look, were astonished by its accuracy. They recorded in their logs how they would sail for days toward a distinctive cloud formation, trusting the wisdom of their local guides, and would eventually see the thin, green line of a tiny atoll materialize exactly where the clouds had promised it would be. To navigate by these sky signs was to see the invisible, to follow a map drawn in the ever-changing atmosphere, a guide that was always present, even when the land itself was still only a hope on the distant sea. The sagas speak of a magical stone, a sunstone that revealed the sun's position on the gloomiest of days. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure myth, a fanciful tale of Viking magic. But science has uncovered a stunning truth behind the legend. The key was a crystal known as Iceland spar, a transparent form of calcite that possesses a remarkable property called birefringence. This crystal does not just bend light, it splits it into two separate beams, creating a faint double image when you look through it. The Vikings discovered that when you held such a crystal up to an overcast sky and slowly rotated it, the double image would shift. At one specific orientation, the two images would merge into one, becoming equally bright. That singular point, that moment of visual clarity, directly pinpointed the hidden sun's location, even if it was just a diffuse glow behind thick clouds or already below the horizon. The crystal was acting as a filter, reading the polarization of sunlight, a pattern in the sky's light that is invisible to our naked eyes, but is always present, a secret signature of the sun's position. Modern experiments have proven this is not just theory. Researchers have used authentic Iceland spar crystals under heavily overcast skies and in twilight conditions, successfully determining the sun's bearing with an accuracy of within a single degree. This was not magic, it was sophisticated applied optics. The most compelling physical evidence comes from a shipwreck. Off the coast of Alderney, a 16th century English warship was discovered, and among the navigation tools lay a clear piece of calcite crystal. It was found right near the captain's quarters, tucked away with the compass and other vital instruments, a silent witness to its potential use. Yet a fierce debate still rages among historians. How common were these sunstones? Were they a standard tool in every Viking longship, or a rare, specialized device used only by the most elite navigators? The North Atlantic is notorious for its prolonged, dense fogs and the weeks of winter darkness. Could a sunstone alone have guided Leif Erikson all the way to North America? Skeptics argue that while the tool worked in principle, its reliability in the violent motion of a ship or in the half-light of the polar twilight remains unproven. Whether it was a primary guide or a precious backup for when the sun and stars vanished, the sunstone stands as a testament to Viking ingenuity, a crystal compass that may very well have lit the way to a new world. While the Vikings may have peered through crystals, Arab navigators in the Indian Ocean mastered the heavens with a tool of elegant simplicity, the camel. Its design was brilliantly uncomplicated, a small rectangular piece of wood, often just 2 inches wide, with a string passed through its center. That string held the key, a series of knots tied at precise intervals, each one a specific location on a well-traveled map. To use it, a sailor would select the knot that corresponded to his destination's latitude. He would then place that knot between his teeth, holding it firmly. Extending his arm, he would move the wooden card away until its lower edge seemed to touch the horizon line, and its top edge just met the star he was sighting, usually the North Star Polaris. When the card perfectly framed this celestial space, he knew he was on the correct latitude. If the star appeared above the card, he was too far north. If it fell below, he was too far south. Each knot on that string was a pre-calculated setting for a different port, a physical memory of the star's heights above the Indian Ocean's familiar trading hubs. A merchant captain sailing from Oman to Calicut, for instance, would use one specific knot for the entire journey, keeping the card perfectly aligned with the star to ensure his ship rode the latitude line like a railroad track straight to the Indian coast. This system transformed complex celestial geometry into a tactile, almost foolproof process. It required no complex mathematics, no delicate moving parts, and no fragile glass. It was a tool built for the real world of commerce, where speed and reliability were everything. With the camel in hand, Arab and Indian sailors could venture across the open ocean with supreme confidence, their wooden dhows crisscrossing the monsoon winds. This simple piece of wood and string became the engine of an economic empire, guiding ships laden with spices, silks, and gems from the shores of East Africa all the way to the ports of southern China, weaving a web of trade across half the world using nothing but the steady light of a star and the wisdom tied into a piece of twine. While Arab navigators relied on the camel, Chinese sailors were perfecting a technology that would transform global exploration, the magnetic compass. They had invented it centuries earlier, during the Han Dynasty, initially for mystical geomancy before realizing its power to guide ships. By the time of the Ming Dynasty's great treasure fleets, the Chinese compass was a marvel of engineering. It was no longer a simple needle floating in a bowl. The needle was now mounted on a sharp pivot point, enclosed in a dry, lacquered wooden case, and often suspended within a special compartment to shield it from the ship's motion and the elements. This provided a stable, reliable reading day or night, in any weather, giving Admiral Zhang his massive vessels an unwavering sense of direction across the vast Indian Ocean. But a compass alone was not enough. Chinese mariners compiled these sailing directions into detailed route books, known as rudders. These were not simple charts, but encyclopedic guides to the sea. A rudder for a voyage to Africa would contain meticulously recorded information: the depth of the water in different bays, the distinctive shape of mountain peaks used as landmarks, the patterns of seasonal monsoon winds, and even specific celestial instructions for navigating by the stars on particular legs of the journey. It was a collective, accumulated wisdom written down, a practical database that turned a dangerous unknown into a manageable route. To track their progress along these documented routes, they employed an ingenious method of timekeeping. They used measured incense sticks, carefully crafted to burn at a perfectly consistent rate. A watch officer would light a new stick at the start of his duty, and its slow, predictable burn would mark the passing hours. This provided a reliable measure of time to calculate speed and distance traveled, a crucial component of their dead reckoning. When combined with compass bearings and the depth soundings from their rudders, it created a comprehensive navigational system of remarkable accuracy. It was this fusion of technology and documented knowledge that enabled the staggering achievements of Admiral Zhang He. His treasure fleets were unlike anything the world had ever seen, with some ships stretching over 400 feet long and carrying hundreds of sailors. From 1405 to 1433, these armadas sailed from China to the coasts of Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and all the way to East Africa. They navigated complex, unfamiliar coastlines and crossed open ocean, reaching the Swahili coast decades before Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama would even round the tip of Africa. Zhang He's pilots did not just stumble upon new lands. They arrived with purpose, their sophisticated methods allowing them to travel to and from these distant ports with a consistency that European explorers could only dream of for another century. This was not a desperate search for a way, but a confident, repeated deployment of one of history's most advanced maritime cultures. This mental map of the heavens was known as the star compass, a conceptual masterpiece that gave Polynesian navigators absolute orientation on the open ocean. Imagine the entire horizon as a circle, divided not into 32 points like a European compass, but into 32 houses. Each house was a directional sector, named not for an abstract direction like north or south, but for a specific, bright star that would rise from that point on the horizon or set into it. The star Arcturus, for example, was known as Hoculia, the star of joy, and its rising point marked one specific house. As the Earth rotated through the night, other stars would rise from that same house, one after another, inheriting its name and its directional meaning. The navigator did not just know one star. He knew the entire family of stars that would pass through each celestial doorway, a constantly shifting roster of guides that kept him on course from dusk until dawn. His true skill lay in holding this mental compass steady in his mind while his canoe moved through the water. He would visualize the circle of houses superimposed on the ocean around him, a fixed grid against which he could plot his position and his heading, no matter how the stars wheeled overhead. The most powerful application of this was the star path. To sail from one island to another, a navigator would not simply aim for a single star. He would identify a sequence of stars, all rising from the same house on the horizon, that would pass directly over his destination. He would steer his canoe to keep the first guide star directly ahead. As that star climbed too high to be useful or set in the west, the next star in the sequence would be rising from the same point on the horizon, ready to take its place as his celestial beacon. He was essentially following a celestial highway, hopping from one stellar guidepost to the next, maintaining a constant bearing across thousands of miles of open ocean. This ancient knowledge was nearly lost, but in the 1970s, a modern Hawaiian navigator named Nainoa Thompson dedicated himself to its revival. With the guidance of Maupiailug, a master navigator from the tiny Micronesian island of Satawal, Nainoa learned to reconstruct the star compass. He then put this theoretical knowledge to the ultimate test. In 1980, he successfully navigated the double-hulled voyaging canoe Hokulea from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, a round trip of over 5,000 miles, without using any instruments. He relied solely on the stars, the swells, the birds, and the wind, reading the same natural signs his ancestors had used 1,000 years before. His journey was more than a feat of endurance. It was a living proof that this sophisticated science was not just legend, but a practical, repeatable method for conquering the greatest expanse of water on Earth. While the chronometer was a treasure for wealthy captains, the common sailor kept time with a far humbler instrument carved from wood. The nocturnal was his pocket watch for the night sky, a clever device that told the hour by the slow turning of the stars. Its design was a set of concentric discs, each one marked with a different layer of celestial information. The largest outer disc was engraved with the days and months of the year. A middle disc showed the 24 hours of the day. At its heart, a smaller disc featured the familiar shapes of the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper, the constellations that served as the clock's hands in the heavens. To raid this stellar clock, a sailor would first hold the nocturnal by its handle, aiming it directly at the North Star, Polaris. He would then rotate the central disk, lining up a pointer with the two bright guardian stars of the Little Dipper, known as the pointer stars. Once the device was aligned with this celestial pivot, he could read the approximate local time from a small hole in the main disk, where the markings for the date and the star position intersected. It was a process of physical alignment, turning the abstract motion of the universe into a tangible number he could use. This simple reading was a lifeline during the long night watch. With no sunlight to create a shadow for a sundial and no access to expensive, fragile clocks, the nocturnal provided a vital anchor in time. It told him how many hours remained until his shift ended, or how long until the crucial moment of dawn. While its accuracy was not perfect, often within a half hour of the true time, it was reliable enough for the daily rhythm of shipboard life. This unassuming tool remained a staple of maritime kits for centuries, from the Middle Ages well into the 1700s. It was democracy in navigation, putting the power of timekeeping into the hands of every sailor who could learn to trace the familiar circles of the northern sky. Every tool in the navigator's chest found its ultimate test on the decks of the great exploration ships. Christopher Columbus, for all his legendary voyage, was a master of estimation, relying heavily on dead reckoning and compass bearings to cross the Atlantic. His celestial fixes with the quadrant were infrequent and often inaccurate, yet his relentless belief in his plotted course, however flawed, propelled him into a new world. Decades later, Ferdinand Magellan's expedition showcased a more sophisticated blend of methods. His crew used astrolabes and cross staffs to track their southward progress along the coast of South America, while their compasses held them to a general westerly heading through the tortuous strait that now bears his name. They were stitching together local observations with a global ambition, a patchwork of techniques that just barely held together across a 3-year circumnavigation of the globe. The true transformation came with the methodical approach of Captain James Cook. On his Pacific voyages, Cook was a one-man laboratory of navigation. He used the marine chronometer to fix his longitude with unprecedented accuracy, while constantly verifying its reading with the complex and demanding lunar distance method. His cartographers produced charts so precise they were used for over a century. Each of these voyages was a stepping stone, each captain building on the hard-won, and often fatal, lessons of those who came before. This was not a sudden revolution, but a slow, cumulative process of refinement. A captain's logbook from a failed voyage was as valuable as one from a success. Its data on currents, winds, and magnetic variation carefully studied to correct the charts for the next expedition. This growing body of knowledge turned the ocean from a realm of terrifying mystery into a system of predictable, if dangerous, highways. Governments soon realized that funding this knowledge was an investment in power and wealth. The British Longitude Act of 1714 was the most famous example, a massive financial prize that spurred decades of innovation and ultimately crowned John Harrison's chronometer as the victor. This was state-sponsored problems solving on a grand scale, proving that the final frontier of navigation was not just a physical challenge, but an intellectual one, solved by the relentless human drive to measure, to map, and to know. These ancient arts of wayfinding represent more than just a collection of techniques. They are a profound testament to human ingenuity and courage. Every star path memorized, every swell felt through a canoe's hull, every knot tied in a camel's string was a step into the vast unknown, driven by a determination to understand our world. These sailors did not conquer the sea through force, but through a deep and respectful connection to the natural world, learning to read its subtle language written in the sky, the water, and the wind. Today, a satellite network gives us our position with digital certainty, a miracle of modern engineering that fits in our pocket. Yet this convenience was built upon millennia of discovery, each innovation standing on the shoulders of those who came before, from the Polynesian star compass to Harrison's relentless chronometer. The next time you glance at a map on your phone, remember the incredible journey that made it possible. The same stars that guided a Viking longship still trace their paths across the night sky. The same ocean swells still roll toward distant shores, holding the old stories for anyone willing to learn how to listen.